I'm going to be taking apart this Haag-Streit BQ slit lamp to refurbish it, and just showing the different types. They're a little bit similar, so taking apart one might be similar to taking apart the other two types, the BM, the BC, BD type. Probably a good thing to do would be, first of all, put power to the slit lamp and look through your binoculars and look at your light, see how it's aligned in your binoculars, look at your diaphragms, see if there's debris on them that you're going to need to clean or address. Look at your filters and look at your centering of each eye, so that depending on what you take apart and put it back together, you're going to know, okay, what do I need to address, what needs more attention than the others. And also when you put it back together, like for instance looking at your binoculars, one eye might be better than the other eye, so you're going to want to identify, okay, which eye is the good eye that I'm going to have to align the other eye up to when it's time to finish everything. So you want to get a good look at what you have before you start taking things apart, so that you have a base of reference. On the BQ head, it's got two parts, or one single section. You can release the binoculars by turning that, and there's a screw under here, an Allen screw, 5 mil. Hold on to it, that you can take that off. The BM head, there's a screw underneath with a big screwdriver. Release that screw and pull it off. The BC, BD type of head comes off. There's two hex head screws underneath to pull that head off. But if you were sending it in for service, you'd want to keep the head connected to the arm and send the whole arm in. On the BM, BQ, BI, upper illumination are held on by a screw, safety screw here, and it's okay to take the screw out and lift up the upper illumination without being mindful of the bearing, because it will stay in there. So whether old style or new style, it's going to be the same. So by removing the safety screw, you can just pull it up, and the bearing is not going to fall down. Now the BC and the BD, you really need to be careful, because you take that safety screw out and the bearing will fall in. On this type, the safety screw is not down here, it's up here, and it's a little different. It's got a spring behind it and a longer safety screw. But there's a bearing in here, and you need to tip it over so that the bearing will not fall down and grease your lens up. You need to tilt it while you're lifting it up. So it's better just to go ahead and take the whole tower off so you can tilt the tower down while you're pulling up your upper illumination. So you'll need some snap ring pliers. It just comes straight up. There should be a washer here. Now you can tilt your upper illumination down and pull it off. Now there's a washer here that you want to be careful about replacing it when it's time to put it back together. There might be a number of very thin washers. To take the tower assemblies off of the BQ or the BM, it's going to be a set screw on either one. It should come right off. To take the arms off, you've got to remove these snap rings with some pliers. You can remove the brass bushing and the dial lock. Depending on how stiff it is, it may be a little hard to come out. You just have to keep turning it until it releases and pull them apart. Then you can take the arms off. And the BCBD, the tower's already off, so you can just slip the arm together with the head. To take the joysticks off, there's a set screw on the bottom. You have to take those out, both kinds, and depending on how hard it is to get off, if it doesn't just pull off, you're going to have to use a hammer, claw hammer, and put it underneath and pull up. Now it's depending how hard it is to pull up, you might further damage the upper bearings that are underneath here, the control handle. But if you've got to take it off, you should be replacing those anyway, the upper bearings. But if it comes off easily, you might have saved your upper bearings. Now before you even do that, move your joystick and feel how loose it is. If it's really loose, if there's a lot of movement in it, then that definitely would tell you that either your control handle is bad or the upper bearings are worn out. So, but if it's pretty tight, it could be that your upper bearings are good and your control handle is good. Now the BCBD, you don't take the joystick out. It comes off as a complete unit. You can tell that the hole is bigger, so the joystick is going to drop down by loosening the assembly underneath. When it's time to take the carriers off to access the main spring on the BQ, it's probably better to go ahead and collapse your auxiliary springs, tighten them down so that when you pull the carrier up, those springs won't go flying. So screw them down all the way to disengage them. And before we loosen the screw to lift up carrier, we're going to turn it over and we're going to remove the screw on the bottom of the spindle because, well, we can unscrew it while it's being held on top. If we were to take that off, which we could now, but before we do, we're going to go ahead and take this stop washer off the bottom of the spindle while it's being held. Same thing with the BM. On the BC-BD, we've got a Torx 10 nut. And this spindle gear is nylon or plastic, whereas the others are brass. Now we can go ahead and remove the back screw, not the one in the middle, the back screw, and that will release the carrier. Keep your hand on it while you're unscrewing it so that you can use both hands to hold the carrier while it comes up with the main spring. It might come up easily or it may have. Now, you see our auxiliary springs are still down on the BQ. Now the BM, the same thing. Keep your hand on it while you're unscrewing it. And lift straight up and pull up. And there's that spring. And also with the BC-BD. It's the same screw. Now this spring is smaller than the BM and BQ, so just keep that in mind. Don't ever take off the shaft bolt. These are on tight. If you loosen that, it's very hard to line back up, so you don't loosen that. And these things should be tight. Your screw here should be tight. Everything here, you don't need to take these bearings out, and they're lubricated. You don't need to do anything with those. Same with this. Don't mess with that if possible. And you don't need to mess with that. Make sure that's tight. Same with the BC-BD. Just don't mess with it. When it comes time to taking the axle and bearings out, I usually take off this side. You have two spacers on either side. This one is thicker, wider, and this one is thinner. And I usually take off this side because this smaller spacer is easier to get back on and off than this bigger one, but it doesn't matter. So I'm going to take the wheel off and the spacer and then pull the bearings through, and being careful to take the bearing assembly with the axle. As it's always a good point, if you're not certain how the bearing configuration is, to just take off a plate on either side and look inside at your axle and your bearings to see if your bearings are on the outside of the bearing holder or on the inside. If they're on the inside, then the bearings have to go with the axle. If the bearings are on the outside, then the bearings have to stay in, and you can pull your axle out, but leaving your bearings inside here. Go ahead and take this wheel off this way. These are some metal wheels that were taken off an old BM reach forward, and these seem like they're more heavy duty. They seem like they'll last longer, but we're going to go ahead and put these on, replacing them. And this little spacer, this thin one, should be able to just pull it off, and when you're putting it back on. So we're going to protect the bearings staying on in here, I'm going to take this lock mechanism off and then put the spacer back on to make sure that the bearing holder doesn't go past and I lose the bearings. So I'm going to go ahead and take this lock assembly off. It's got 2 screws and 2 spacers. The spacers are there so that the lock assembly can move. You have a screw and a spacer. I'm going to pull the lock assembly out. I can clean in here and looking at this, it looks like the little brake shoe is missing. The axles, this knob is not supposed to be going down onto the axle. On the Haag-Streit you have a little shoe here. And the shoe is out of position. So it was never in the right position to work. So this lock assembly, the brake shoe, wasn't in the right position. It was just floating. So the knob was just going right up against the axle when it's supposed to be pushing up against this little brake shoe. So see, the brake shoe's got a hole in it, and that hole rests in this screw to keep it from turning. Somehow it was not on there, so the brake shoe was moving. So remember to, when you're putting your brake assembly back on, find the little hole in the shoe, stick it where it goes right there, where that screw is coming out a little bit, and then that will keep it from turning. So here's where the correct position of the little brake shoe, where the screw is, fits into the hole, so that when you're turning your knob, it's pushing up against the brake. But there's another video on showing the different brake assemblies, and you might want to look at that if you're interested. But when you're putting it back together, make sure you have that brake shoe is in the right position. Now that we've gotten it off, we're going to look inside here and look at our bearings. Okay, so it's the old style, and the bearings are on the inside of the holder. So that means the bearings need to stay with the axle. If the bearings were on the outside, they would need to stay in here. So we'll put our spacer back on this side so that these bearings won't go past that point and come out. So this is our protection to keep it. See, this thinner one goes on easier than the wider one. That's why I do this side, because it can slip it on and off easier. Okay, now our bearings are not going to fall out. We can turn the other side. And remove the plate, and we can pull the whole axle with bearings out. So we'll remove those two screws, and they also have spacers. They're smaller because it's a thinner plate. We don't have to take the wheel off, even though I'm going to take it off later to replace it with wheels. But you don't have to take the wheel off. You can just take the screws out, because the plate is going to go with the axle. These are pretty thin slits on these screws, so it takes a special screwdriver with a very thin edge to go on these screws. This one's been filed. That's why. It's a big one, but it's very strong and thin. That's why I like this one. Okay, now we've removed the plate, and we can bring our bearing assembly with it, pull it with it. Don't pull, or you could push that small disc off and lose your bearings. So try to get the bearing assembly with it and pull it as you're pulling out the axle. Okay, now we're safe. We can clean our bearings, and we can observe them, and as we're looking at it, one bearing is missing. So that's interesting. We can put that back in at another time, and we can clean our axle and the inside of our casing. So there's another video on putting bearings back in, but basically it's taking the wheel off and moving. You have access where you can bring the bearings close to this edge, and then you can put something in here and push the bearing in to the slot. See, this one is deeper. So we would be, first of all, pushing this bearing there, and then adding another 4 millimeter bearing to fill that spot. Now, again, this is the old style bearing assembly, but the new style, they're enclosed in a plastic holder, and you would basically be slipping this whole thing in here, and it replaces this assembly. If you have lost the bearings and you can't find them, or you don't know how to put them back in, which there's a video showing how to do that, but if you can't, don't have time, you can always order a bearing assembly, and it fits right on. But these are better, really. These wear out. The bearings, they're not as good as the old brass spring set assembly. So, if possible, keep using this. This wears out. Okay, this was for the BQ base, but the regular BM base is the same thing. The bearing assembly is the same thing, so it would be the same procedure. Now on the BC, BD series, it's a little different. They don't have the lock assembly on the outside. It's on the inside. And so this is similar to the Topcon, where the bearings are in here and can be taken out. But this kind, the bearings are not on the inside here, but the bearings are on the outside. And so they have to stay inside this little cylinder. They have to stay enclosed in here. And with that, you could take the axle out without the bearings, but you better leave the lock assembly in here. Leave your knob on your lock assembly, and you could take either side wheel off and just pull the axle out, because the bearings are going to be staying in here. And you could do that, but you couldn't do that on the regular Haag-Streit. You pull the axle out of the bearings, they're going to fall. So the BC and BD is typical of the Topcon model, where the bearings are on the outside of the holder and they're inside this little cylinder. So just be aware of that. So if I wanted to take the axle out of here and leave the bearings in here, I'm going to leave the lock assembly in place with my knob, keep it in place. You can go ahead and tighten it and release it just a little bit so the axle will move, but keep it in place. And then I can take the wheel and the spacer off and pull the axle straight on out. I'm going to bump it so I can slowly move this spacer off. Okay, I've got the spacer, and this is staying in place so the bearings can't go any further, and I can just pull the axle straight on out. So just remember that the BC, you can take the axle out if you keep the lock in. And then putting it back in is the same way. You just slide it back in either way. And put your spacer back on in your wheel. So that's the BC and the BD. Now that we've taken that off, we can turn our bases over and remove our joystick assembly and our spindle assembly. Now here there's pieces, whereas this, it's a set. And we're going to take all these pieces and the spindle, and here this is going to be a set, this BC. And here you would take, if you want to take the whole set off, you would just take the screws that have the Loctite glue on them. Those are the ones that are holding the assembly onto the base. We'll take this one apart. I'm going to turn it upside down. I made this table that's got this cutout so that we can turn our assembly down. It'll hang through that gap and it'll be flat. So if you do this a lot, making a little table like that could be helpful. And we'll be taking off this joystick assembly. Now the spindle assembly, which is afterwards, we could have taken these 4 screws out and taken the whole spindle assembly out this way. But we're going to leave it in anchored to the plate so we can take off the screws and things easier down here while it's still attached. This is holding it in place. So you're going to take off these 5 screws. Take off these 5 screws. On the newer models, these are Torx. I think Torx 10. We can take our plates off. you'll be needing to clean all these, clean all that, clean all that, and then you have your control handle, and to loosen that, the best way is to stick something in here to hold it from turning, and then you can unscrew the plate, your spring plate, because these are tight. Take this spring cover off. One side has the concave side where the screws will seat down, so when you're putting it back together, put it on the right side. And you have the spring, and you have a spacer underneath it. And since we've already taken our joystick off, we can just push it up from underneath the control handle, and we can take our spacer off. And this is one of the upper bearings that you may need to be replacing. Then you have your control handle, and it has got a lot of grease on it. And then you have a little coupling piece, keyway, or coupling key that needs to come out. So this coupling key is a round surface. It goes in the hole, and then it has a square edge that stops it from going any further, and then that's going to be riding on inside the joystick and the control handle, keeping it in one place. So that needs to be there. And then you can push your other upper bearing with something flat and just push it up from underneath. And depending on how much play your control handle joystick had, one way you can check to see if they're bad is put both upper bearings together and squeeze them. If they can squeeze all the way closed, then they're worn out. There needs to be a little bit of a gap. So these have been used a while, and because it's all the way flat, that means it's kind of worn out, and so your control handle and joystick will have some little give to it when you shake it. So if you want a tight joystick, then you should replace these. They're not that expensive, but it's good. And if you had a lot of play in your joystick, it could be that your control handle has worn out, the bottom of it, and it's riding in here. There's grease in there, so you might want to put your control handle back into the bottom plate and wiggle it. And if you can hear it clicking, that's when when all the grease is cleaned out. If you can move it and you hear clicking, then that could be because your control handle is wearing down. And if you wanted to have your joystick really tight, then you may need to replace this control handle. But these are pretty expensive. Just keep that in mind. It's they're very expensive. I don't know why, but I guess it's once you've removed the three screws, the washers that are in there, you can push them to the outside so that when you pull your spindle up, they'll still be there. Otherwise, you'll be pulling them up and you'll be pulling the washers and you could lose them. So if it doesn't want to come up easily, you can just push up from the other side, make the shaft go down and push up from the other side, but it should come out. So here's your spindle assembly, and we've already taken our stop washer off, which earlier because it was held in tight at the top. Otherwise, if it had not, then we would have had to try to take that washer off, and you'd have to hold it to unscrew it because it's tight. And then take our 3 washers out, and they have beveled edges also, so keep in mind when you're putting it back together. And then this whole spindle assembly should be cleaned. We've got all that off. Now if you wanted to take the upper portion of your spindle assembly off, you take off these 4 screws, and if you needed to get to the bottom plate, just take them off and pull it up. These screws should be on pretty tight, so you might need something to help you to loosen the screws. And when you're putting it all back together, be sure to use something that you can use to tighten these screws also. When you have them all 4 out, then you can just lift the whole assembly out. We could have taken it off earlier and worked on out here by itself separate. It's totally up to you. And then if you needed to replace the plate, you would get some type of chisel and pull it up, or you might have to chip it off. There's another video on replacing the plate. On the BC, BD models, you might want to use some acetone on the Loctite to free those screws up, and it's going to be a Torx 10 to unscrew those 3. If you want to take the whole assembly out, if you wanted to work on the inside, then you'd be taking the 3 other screws out to get to that set of components that make up the BCBD arrangement. It's a little bit different, but you have access through the other 3 screws. And then to get the spindle gear off, it's more of plastic, and again there's 3 screws. Those are also Torx 10. Take those off. You have 3 screws, and the washers are similar to the other BQ. Once you have these removed, you can pull it up. If it doesn't want to come up, you can push it from underneath, and you can pull that assembly up. If your washers were here, be sure you don't lose those. And these screws are not magnetic, so you might have to pick them out of the hole with some tweezers when you unscrew them. So I'll just let you know that. And we have this assembly. It's not quite as heavy duty as the BM, but again, it has a shaft with threads that need to be cleaned and re-lubed. And that will be in the next video, showing how to put everything back together, what types of grease. And this grease, I think, is going to be a little different than your regular BM BQ because it looks like it's a very thin viscosity. So this one, I don't think this is going to take the number 8. This is going to probably take the number 2 or number 3. One of those. A thinner viscosity than number 8, which is on the other type. So just keep that in mind. But this, you have drag in here. Every time you have grease, it's going to put tension and drag on it. So you want to try to minimize the threading in and out tension. So that's all out. If you needed to get to your rheostat, of course it's under here to replace that. And then here's your bearing assembly if you need to replace that. But I'm not going to do that. It's just 4 screws. Be careful, don't let the bearings go past the outer boundaries of this holder, or you'll lose the bearings. Now we've already taken the upper illumination assembly off of the tower, and now we're going to take apart our tower to address various pieces. Well, we're going to first take this slit-width assembly completely off if you need to, and we're going to do that because we're going to paint it. And so one thing we have to be always mindful of is the rod that's going inside. Our angle of inclination prevents us from pulling it out too far. Just enough room for the rod to move. But if we went past that without removing the rod, you would bend the rod. So that's the first thing we're going to want to do after we take off this assembly, is take that rod out of there so that we won't bend it. So we're going to release these 2 screws on the side, remove them, and then we're also going to release the pressure on these tension screws on each side. This is to give it tension when you're tilting the tower. And if you're going to be taking the rest of this off, you might want to see, well, is it turning? If it's not turning, you definitely need to take this apart and clean the shaft, which is what we're going to do anyway. But if you didn't want to take off this knurled nut cam assembly because it was moving freely, then you wouldn't have to. But we're going to do it. So I'm going to take these 2 screws off, release the pressure on the 2 side, the tension screws. Just turn them a little bit until it releases the pressure. And then we'll take off these 2 screws. Removing those 2 screws. And now this part might be a little bit harder to remove this assembly off of these posts. And what you could do is rock it sideways as you're pulling out, and that's the way to really loosen it, because it's tight. So first of all, try rocking it as you're pulling out, and this one happens to be coming out, so that's good. But if it didn't, you might have to get like a rubber mallet and tap both sides to get it going. But usually, even when it's hard, if you keep twisting it back and forth while you're pulling, then it will work itself out. So this is what we wanted to take off. Now we have our little piston. We're going to pull that out. And our rod, our long rod, upper rod, or this is the lower rod. There's another rod inside the illumination head we call the upper rod. This is the lower rod, and it should be clean. Well, you're going to have to clean it and oil it with some rim oil. Now this is free. Now it's okay if we turn our tower past our point of inclination. And now, if this was kind of stiff, well, you need to take this apart. So we'll take off the angle of inclination and our cam. These screws might be tough too. No, you don't have to take the screws all the way out. If you did, that would be okay. And sometimes these are in tight, and you might have to get something to knock it loose. This side usually has some putty or something in it. There may or may not be a screw in there. That's a good spot in case something is not working right when you have it screwed together, and you need another screw in here to hold it tight from moving. But that's in another video. It's in the putting it back together video. So release this screw. It might be tough. So it's got a little indentation in it where the screw is going in. So that's what's really holding it tight. And you see there's a little mark here. So there is a screw that's barely in, and they've just covered the rest of it up with putty. But there's another screw in, and that just barely touches the other side to keep it in place from moving. And then we don't have to take the screw completely out, but if you did, that would be okay, out of our cam assembly. And that's taken off by, it's got a little clip on the end. We'll take that off and clean it and re-lube that. And now we can remove our lower section, and we'll be cleaning all this and re-lubing it. We're going to clean all this. Could have taken our mirror out already and put it in a protective spot and clean that later. Now the little bands in here that are holding the mirror, sometimes they are a little bit flat, so you can get your screwdriver and put your finger on the top of the ribbon, and then just putting your finger on top of the ribbon and then just twisting it up a little bit to bring the middle section of that ribbon up, because that's where it's going to be touching the mirror, and you want the mirror to be pressured right in the middle. So if those are squeezed down too much, you might want to increase the pressure on that mirror by bending that ribbon up just a little bit to strengthen those little tension ribbons. And then if we needed to take the stage assembly off, it's got two screws here. Taking those two screws out, and again here this might be very tight, so once again our rocking motion as we're pulling to try to wiggle this off these posts. When we're turning it, it's like one side might give and then the other side might give. So it's like a rocking motion, and sometimes it's just a little bit, but if you keep doing it, it will finally release. Then maybe put some oil in here while it's still on, and then you might have to gently, with a rubber mallet, tap the edges with something rubber to try to get it going. Once you get a little bit of a gap, then you're almost there and you can work it and work it off. So this is your stage assembly, and we have another video on that whole thing of refurbishing the inside, but this one is really good. This is the old style, and the old style that won't pull off. These are good. So we're having no trouble with this stage going all the way down, and we might want to clean it and put a little rim oil on there. Now these two pieces, if you had to take these two apart, we'd be unscrewing these two screws. If you had to replace them, or if you were going to paint everything, then you could either just paint them like this, cover this section up and paint that, or you can take them off. We'll go ahead and take these off. So we'll just be releasing these two screws. You have a screw and a plate, a thin plate, and then you have there's a spacer in there, and then these you've got to push. While you're pulling, you can push with your thumb to see if you can release that. So this one came up. Now, sometimes on the old, if a slit lamp is really old, you see this little keyway? Well, it gets, from rocking back and forth, it kind of gets a little enlarged. So if it were on and you noticed that there was a lot of play in there, then once it's back in, you might want to get a punch and just punch the edges a little bit on both sides to close up any kind of gap in here, so that they're not rocking by themselves. But you may never have that issue, but if it on a really old slit lamp, those could be worn out a little bit. So you need to kind of put a little indentation to push that metal back up tight. And do the same for the other side. Pulling off this side. Then we have this. Now, you should never have to take this out. I'll just leave that alone. This has got putty covering the hole for a reason. You shouldn't have to. But if you did, if that were for whatever reason, there's putty in there, you take that screw out and you can pull this shaft out. It's got an indentation in it, so the screw is going to go right back into its original hole, its original position. So you can't really mess it up, but they leave it on there because you don't need to be taking that off. And you don't need to be adjusting this unless you're doing some alignment of the light. But if that's never disturbed, you shouldn't even have to mess with that. And now in here, on these, you have this little piece that comes out here, and you have a felt washer. This is like a friction ring, and so when you screw it in, it puts friction and that's what helps to determine how tight your tower is tilting, depending on how strong, how tight your screw is, will either make the tilting of the tower easier or harder. So that's how this works, if you were wondering. But that should have its normal amount of grease. You don't have to put anything else on there. It's probably good enough the way it is. So now these are free to paint anyway. If you were going to spray paint these, you know, tape up the ends so you don't spray these ends okay, and it leaves us with the slit width adjustment assembly. This is a pretty important part of the slit lamp, and we'll be taking it apart. This spring, something is dead in here because it's not. It should be springing up. So this spring is it may not be the spring. It just needs a little lubricant to lift up the little. We'll call that a little piston also, to release that so it can keep pressure on this lever. Okay, but to take this apart, first we're going to take off this tension screw, which you adjust the tension of the slit width assembly, which you'll have to maybe readjust after you put it on your everything back together. And then just pull these out. It also has a felt washer, a friction ring. Some are thick and some are thin. This is a thinner one, and it should have enough lubricant. I wouldn't put any more lubricant on that after even when you put it back together. And then we'll take off these two screws. Okay, now we can pull this little assembly out, and this can be taken apart and cleaned, and it should be re-lubricated with the number 9 grease. It's a thicker viscosity grease, and on here it's always screwed onto the shaft right where the gap is. So we'll take the screw, we could loosen it, we could leave it in, and then pull that apart. And a lot of times there's dirt and grime in here which needs to be cleaned. There's a little raised edge that when you're putting it back together, you want to put a little bit of grease on there so that it will lubricate. This shaft will need to be cleaned and re-lubed with the number 9. And then here's our inner workings, our bearing and the cam. Push it out. And this is the same as a tonometer bearing, but that's a bearing, and it's usually pretty free. They're usually nothing's wrong with it, but if it is, keep that in mind. And it's got a spacer on each side. Those need to be there to keep that bearing right in the place, because it's going to be pushing on the bottom of this piston, and then the piston is going to be pushing the rod, and then the rod is going to be pushing your stage. So that's all important. So we need to make sure you clean all that and re-lube it with the correct lube, The next video was talking about that. And then to push that out, we'll get something that won't scratch. And we'll go through here and push this side out. That's that side, and just remember the little side goes here and then the big one over here. And then we're going to work on this. Now if you didn't want to take this apart, you were trying to just do some maintenance, you could squirt a little rim oil in there and try to free that little piston up. But then it's all the way down, so we're going to take that apart. Okay, taking those screws out, and this comes up. It's got a little pin in here. Make sure it's not frozen, and it can move. And underneath here, see there's a little, like a little piston in here. That's got to be freed up. So we'll try to clean it with some fuel to release that little piston. But there's a little spring underneath it, and that needs to move. So we can pour some of this on it, or I've got some in here. I'm going to get it's possible it's just gummed up from not being used, or it's just old. So you have to work that, and it's got a little hole in it, so if you need to get a little stick pin to go in that hole so you can pull it up, you can do that too. There it comes. Okay, we've got it out. We'll have to clean that. It's got a spring under it, and then now this is free. Everything is out of it. It all needs to be cleaned. If you're going to be painting it, you have to paint it in the way you are able to. I have some extra parts that I'm going to stick in on all the sides from another slit lamp that I use for painting, and so I can put everything back together and just spray it attached to all the pieces. But on this one, this is going to have to take some heavy-duty sanding to get all that. This is from sweat, from the finger sweat. So we've taken everything apart, and we have a bunch of parts everywhere. So we're going to now be cleaning, re-lubing, and putting it back together. And if you don't know what the greases are that Haag-Streit recommends, that's important. The greases are fairly expensive, but if you're going to be doing this, getting those greases is important. So, hope you can see that, if that's important to you. It is to me, and I've had to refer to these a lot until I learned what grease were needed. So this video was actually made after the video of putting everything back together, so I did this out of sequence. But if you wanted to look at more specifics about the different assemblies, just look at the slit lamp, Haag-Streit slit lamp playlist, and you should find more information about the different assemblies and what specifics about those assemblies. So hope you can find what you're looking for, and I hope this helps.